knew where everyone was going. And so if you caught the virus, they could find everyone that you'd been in contact with and everyone they'd been in contact with, and they could super isolate and test everyone. And that way, since their numbers never got out of control like our numbers have, so that their government could stay on top of testing and tracing all the individual cases, they were able to do that, and they were able to stop it from going exponential. And just, the number of cases there has been slowly increasing for a long time, total number of cases. And so basically it looks like they've had it under control. And, they did some other less expensive measures, for example, like canceling big events.
Right.
But I don't think they canceled schools. I don't think they made people stop going to work. They still have kind of business as usual with really good scientific testing and tracing. They're also like, they make everyone take their temperature when they go to the airport and stuff like that. They take people's temperatures a lot.
Okay.
Any way that you could easily see if someone's likely to have it, they find those people and they isolate them. And so the idea is, before it gets out of control, so strategies basically before it gets out of control, to where there's just too many cases that the government can't follow them anymore, you have a really good, well-organized regimen of testing and tracing.
Right.
And anyone that could have possibly been in contact with it, whenever it pops up in a particular area, anyone that could have possibly been in contact with it gets tested and quarantined until the danger is past.
Yeah.
And, and there's some travel restrictions where appropriate, restrictions on big group meetings, where appropriate. I think that I believe Japan did a lot of mask wearing. I might be wrong. There are at least 3 Asian countries that appear to have successfely implemented testing and tracing.
Yeah.
I believe that's Korea, Japan, and what's it called? What's the third country? Taiwan. I keep getting that. I know it's Korea and Japan. I think it's Taiwan. And we'll say maybe China, and maybe China. It's not totally clear.
Right.
Then the amount that's going to be available about how the virus works a month from now, there's no reason that all the first world countries in the world shouldn't be able to get it under control.
Right.
So to me, that's very promising that we're going to be able to have, for the most part, business as usual with lots and lots of screenings and testings and stuff like that. But when we get the number down to a manageable number of cases, which we don't have right now, then we have lots of tests available, which we will soon, and lots of other screening methods available. I think basically the term I heard used for the strategy that we're going to be implementing, that I think we're going to be implementing, the world's going to be implementing, and also the best strategy is called the hammer and the dance.
Okay.
So we're putting down the hammer now, where we just hammer the virus by everyone self-quarantining and just giving the virus minimal opportunities to spread. And then the hammer doesn't take very long, as China demonstrated.
Yeah.
It takes weeks. And I think, we're basically isolated for the rest of the month.
Right.
And people are wondering, are we going to be isolated much longer than that? Are we not? I think we're going to have it either under control or clearly getting there by the end of the month. So I think the light at the end of the tunnel will be very visible by the end of the month. And that the hammer portion will be done by then. Will be done at least around then. The hammer portion will be done. We will reduce the total number of cases to a manageable and traceable number of cases. Hopefully we will have increased our ability to test and various other screening methods. And then from there, I like to get under control in that region if it flames up beyond the ability for local officials to control it. But it is unlikely we would need to shut down the country again if we execute the strategy reasonably.
Okay.
And then we're going to keep playing whack-a-mole until there's a vaccine that comes out.
Right.
And I think that's our strategy, and it'll slow down our economy, somewhat, but nothing like not that much. For the most part, it'll be business as usual, and we can wait it out until there's a vaccine. This strategy is good, A, because it's a hell of a lot cheaper than flattening the curve, B, because it has a hell of a lot fewer fatalities than flattening the curve, and C, because it's also a lot less painful to execute than flattening the curve. We can have business as usual. Also, because it's going to create a hell of a lot fewer strains of the virus than flattening the curve. So we have a much better chance to actually find a vaccine. If we flatten the curve, we might never find a vaccine. It might come back every year. Miserable failure.
Yeah.
So that's the strategy I think we're going to use. And it's a strategy I think officials, if you ask them behind closed doors, what are we planning to do, we're using. And I can give you a pretty compelling piece of evidence why I'm confident that we're not trying to flatten the curve anymore. Dr. Fauci announced that he expected 1 to 200,000 deaths in the United States from corona. Well, you do the math. If you're flattening the curve and there's a 1% death rate, assuming that the medical system isn't overwhelmed.
Yeah.
By the way, if it is overwhelmed, the death rate would likely be the equivalent of 4 or 5%, including collateral damage. It would be pretty rough. So if there's a 1% death rate and 180 million people get it, that's 1.8 million fatalities. So why did he say 100,000 to 200,000? There's only two things it could mean. And if people were good at math, they would have realized that he had just dropped a bomb. But I think most people were not good at math, so they didn't realize it. They just dropped a bomb when he said there's going to be 100,000 to 200,000 deaths. It means one of two things. Either it turns out it's actually like the flu, and it's not more deadly than the flu, and we just have 90% asymptomatic carriers, or we've completely changed strategies without announcing it.
Okay.
And the evidence is against the flu scenario and in favor of we completely change strategies without announcing it scenario, which again I find concerning that we would completely change strategies without announcing it. However, if you look at the hammer and the dance strategy, the number of cases right now we've got, I think, in the ballpark of 10,000 deaths in the United States. How do we get from 10,000 to 100 to 200,000?
Right.
I don't think we would. If we, maybe the people that currently have it in the United States, I think we're already turning the curve. So, based on just the daily new cases, it appears that the curve has already turned. I think it's not crystal clear yet, but to me, it's pretty clear. I think in the next week, it's going to be crystal clear.
Okay.
So the number of deaths just from the people that will already get the virus due to what's already happened is, I don't know, maybe twice as much as the number of deaths we've had, maybe 20,000.
Okay.
Not 100,000. So by the time the hammer is done, say there's going to be 20,000 deaths, maybe 30,000 deaths.
Right.
In the United States. If we execute the strategy, we're never going to let it get out of control like it did. We're going to have tremendously smaller. Just look at Korea. Korea, their cases are trickling in. We're going to have our cases trickling in until the vaccine comes. We're not going to get from 30,000 to 100,000. We might have, I don't know, 50,000.
Okay.
50, something like that. Modest number of deaths. Ironically, like the flu.
Yeah.
Although the death toll might be like the flu. It's not to say that this virus is like the flu.
Right.
The only reason the death toll would be like the flu is that we found a really innovative way to handle it and keep many people from getting it. But I think ultimately the death toll is going to be like the flu, as long as we get it under control. As long as there's not huge government incompetence, I think the death tolls.
All right.
And as long as ultimately the vaccine works, death toll be like the flu. I think he said 100,000 to 200,000 to protect his own behind, so that it doesn't look good if you didn't take it seriously.
Right.
It doesn't look good if you didn't take it seriously. And he said 100,000 to 200,000. Actually, it was 2 million to 4 million. Right. But it does look good. No one's going to curse him out if he said 100,000, 200,000, and there's 40,000 deaths.
Right.
So I think that's the reason for his number.
All right.
So, I think
that covers it there.
mention one more thing.
Okay.
I know I said a lot. All right, can I mention two more things?
I mean, sure, yeah.
All right. One more thing is that I mentioned first world countries. I didn't say anything about poorer countries. With poorer countries, it's a bigger question mark. I think it'll be less contagious because all of those poorer countries are also warmer countries, or almost all of them.
Yeah.
But I think it's still going to be contagious.
Right.
And they might be in trouble. We're going to find out, especially India.
Okay.
They might be in trouble. We're going to find out. Hopefully they'll find ways to manage it. And if they're in trouble, we might be in trouble because they might breed all sorts of new strains of the virus while getting themselves in trouble.
Yeah.
So it could spell future problems for the rest of the world.
Yeah.
Of course, in terms of immediate reinfection, I don't think it's going to affect us because we're just going to have travel restrictions.
Right.
That means that the virus will gradually die out. If the average person infects less than one person, the virus will gradually die out. Our current methods have R being way under one, and that's the hammer.
Right.
It'll die out pretty quickly under the hammer. But then with the dance part, we don't to make R significant. The lower R goes, the more expensive and draconian our measures are to get it down that far. So we have to close schools. Everyone has to self-isolate. We have to be under quarantine, going to the grocery store once every 3 days during a designated hour, like a lot of countries are doing. So basically the idea is we want to get R below 1. We don't. The lower we get R, the more like exponentially expensive it becomes.
Yeah.
So when we're playing whack-a-mole, we want R to be slightly below 1. We want to use the cheapest methods, such as wearing masks, such as testing and tracing individual cases, such as banning large group meetings. Whatever are the cheapest and most effective methods that barely get R below 1, which need to be evaluated with a lot of studies and are being evaluated, that's what we need to use to minimize the cost and still have the same result. Whether R is 0.99 or whether R is 0.1, the total result, the overall result in terms of number of cases, number of fatalities is going to be very, very similar, but it's going to be tremendously more expensive to have the lower R value versus the higher R value.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Igor, for your time, and thank you for answering all of our questions so thoroughly.
My pleasure. I hope it helped.
Yep, it does. All right. Thank you again.
All right. Thank you. Have a good day.
All right. You too.